In today's video, we're going to do a gear guide for level 170 in preparation for Darkmoor around the corner. A lot of you guys have requested me to post all my gear guides, and I usually tend to do it around this time of the year. So we're going to be going in depth into what jewels you should be using, as well as what weaving you should be doing, as well as the different pet combinations that you can use for your school. So if you do enjoy this type of content, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, all type of stuff. And let's get into the intro that I'm going to be using for the rest of my videos for the next 7 days, I guess. So let's talk about some pieces that I'm going to be recommending in the video. You're going to hear me talk a lot about Avatar and Reaver in majority of these videos. And I know I get this question asked a lot: which should I farm? Should I farm Avatar for Salinopolis gear, or should I farm Reaver for Wallaroo gear? Now the dead set answer is it comes down to personal preference. If you already have Wallaroo gear, which is the Reaver gear, you don't need to farm Avatar. And if you already have Avatar, you don't need to farm Reaver. If you're just starting out, I recommend farming Avatar in Salinopolis instead of farming Reaver in Wallaroo, because it's a little bit more tedious and not everyone's going to be farming that, just because it's been a while and not many people care about it too much currently. But I do want to preface, I will be talking about it in the video. Certain Avatar pieces I prefer and certain Reaver pieces I prefer. So you'll see me talk like Reaver boots I might prefer more than Avatar boots. I might prefer Avatar hats versus Reaver hats, stuff like that. So just pay attention when I do mention those. They're the exact same stats. I have to clarify this all the time. They're the exact same stats, just the difference is item cards. If you do not care about item cards, just farm Avatar, straight up. Also in my setups, I do tend to mention a lot of Shabalba, Hunhao, Private Eye, all that type of stuff. So if you hear me mention Shabalba, Hunhao, that is from the Azteca raid, the Crying Sky raid that you can do in guilds. If you hear me mention Private Eye and Crime Fighter, that is from the new raid, which is the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. So just pay attention when I do mention out those names. Now, if I do mention that I use Shabalba or Hunhao pieces, you don't necessarily have to go out and go farm them right away. The reason why I currently use them is because of them item cards. Now, what you should be doing is farming the new raid, Ghastly Conspiracy raid. It's the same wands as Shabalba and Hunhao, the only difference is the item cards. But Shabalba and Hunhao will not be getting 180 upgrades in the future. The new raid will. So if you want to preemptively get ready for 180, you should be farming the new raid, get those wands for the stats that I mentioned, and then hopefully whenever we get 180, we will have those upgrades for the new raid, and you can use those pieces as well in your builds, which I 100% will be. Certain pieces of Shabalba and the rod wands from the new raid are better than actually Reaver and Avatar, so be wary about that as well. They give like an extra pierce and stuff like that, so just keep that in mind. When it comes to the wands, I do want to preface this. I do prefer the Shabalba wands from the Azteca raid a little bit more than the rod wands currently in the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. Yes, they have the same exact stats, but I do like the item cards on the Shabalba wands. So when it comes to preference, number one to me is Shabalba currently. Number two is going to be the rod wands from the current raid, which is the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. Number three, if you don't have either of those options, you can use the Fairy K wands from the Fairy K pack in the Crown shop. And then after that, if you don't want to do any of those three, you don't want to do the raid, or you don't want to open packs, use Reaver, Avatar. It's really up to you. They both have the same exact stats, just item cards are different. I don't have a preference between them. They're in the same tier in my opinion. When it comes to amulets, if you hear me talk about amulets, Private Eye is my number one recommendation right now, unless you are balanced, which I will be putting a certain section for balance whenever I do make the balance video. But for amulets, for every school except balance, I prefer Private Eye as my number one priority because I do like the item cards. After that is Reaver, which you can get from, of course, Wallaroo. Those give you a blade, which I prefer. I know Hunhao and Shabalba, Private Eye, Crime Fighter have slightly better stats, but I really put the item card at a higher value in my opinion. So that's why I put Reaver as your secondary option. And then third, it's a split between three different templates, which is Hunhao, Shabalba, and Fairy K. Yes, Shabalba and Fairy K are exactly the same, but I don't really care for the item cards too much on them, just because you're getting those same exact item cards from the Shabalba one. So that's why I'm putting them on the same tier. And then after that, Avatar is bottom tier, just because yes, it has the same stats as Reaver, but the item cards on it are not really sought after at all. So that's why it is at the bottom tier. And then lastly, when it comes to decks, you're going to hear me talk about decks. I prefer Private Eye decks because you do get that blade. When it comes to it after that, my recommendation is using the Shabalba decks from the Azteca raid. And then after that, if you don't want to do either of the raids, you can use Reaver, Avatar. It's really just up to you, personal preference. I put them on the same tier just because they both have blades and traps depending on your school that are useful. So they're in the same tier. I feel like just getting both are really good to have. And then after that, I think the bottom tier is Hun Hao and Fairy K, because they don't really give you anything that's useful. They both give like terrible cards in my opinion. And then lastly, what I want to mention in this intro is when I do mention pins and power pins, run whatever you want. It's dealer's choice. You can choose whatever you like. I don't have a vendetta or anything like that against a certain school. Use whatever pins at the end of the day. There is no like end all be all. Have fun with your PvE builds at the end of the day. When it comes to power pins, I do recommend different pins depending on your school. So my recommendations out of all the power pins is Storm, Balance, Death, or Fire. If you are on a Storm, I do recommend using Life. Now let me quickly explain this. I do recommend Storm pins if you ever get Mantle in your fight and you are using the Weaving Blades from Weaving, which I will be mentioning as well. Those are Storm School majority of the time. So that's why I do recommend that, just to prevent a Mantle. And it's the same argument for Balance and Death, because hey, if you're using Elemental Blades, Elemental Traps, Balance Blades, Dragon Blades, whatever, a Balance Pin is just nice on the off chance you do get hit with a Mantle. Death has the same argument, because hey, if you ever get hit with the Feint, or if you're trying to use a TC Dark Pact in any sort of scenario, or maybe in Power, and you get hit with a Mantle, you do have at least a better chance of not fizzling it due to you having Power Pins. And then Fire is in that niche category, which I like using at times, just so I don't have to switch my Scald and Syndiate setups, because those I can just put on a Fire pin, and then all I have to do is switch my hat and switch my wand, and I'm good to go. So that's why I have Fire pins as well listed for that reason. And then Life pins, it falls underneath a niche category. It's specifically for Storm, just because their Weaving Blade is through Life currently, and maybe in future guides I might adjust this, but Storm is using Life Weaving majority of the time, and having a Life pin for accuracy is good to have, just so you don't fizzle your dual blade on the off chance you get hit with a Mantle. And then you can use Life as well in other schools if you want to. Maybe you're trying to use some healing spells, but I don't really have a recommendation for that, because in max level, you're not really healing as much in casual play if you have the min-max setups. Another thing I want to mention for when it comes to the builds that I'm going to be mentioning is the tier jewels. Now, when it comes to tier jewels, I usually use health opals. But if you want to and you don't want to use health opals, I strongly recommend that you either socket a potent trap as well as a sharpened blade. It can be either or you can do both. It's good to have very good stackability purposes for when you're farming stuff and you need to use different buffs, but that's a strong recommendation if you want to use those instead of using a health tier socket as well. Of course, you can socket on different item cards like a star blade or like a certain trap, etc. By all means, go for it. But my recommendation is either put on health or put on sharpened blade or potent trap. Those are my only recommendations when it comes to tier sockets. I will be talking about pets and stuff, but that will be in a later section in this video. But that is it for this intro. This is a template for all my videos, and I just want to keep it straightforward like that. The only thing that's going to be slightly different is if you're balanced, which I will be mentioning in the balance video whenever I post that guide. Because the wands, amulets, and decks, I have a slight little bit of different preference on that school because the item cards are so weird for balance. So I'm just putting that out there. But we can actually get into the whole rest of the video. Now that we got the intro out the way, let's go over which weaving that you should get done for life school. Now, obviously, number one option is go to Surge, do your storm weaving. Rank 1, you get yourself the energy blade, and then rank 4, you get the energy attenuate. These are very good cards, especially on a life, because the fact is you are used for a lot of support strats. So having energy blade, very good for those storm hitters, and same thing with the energy attenuate, because it's a 35 attenuate versus the regular attenuate, which is like 20%. Yes, it costs a pip, but it doesn't really matter in that sort of sense. But these are very good spells, and if you're complaining about the pip on the energy blade being 2, simply change your school pip to storm. Problem solved. I see a lot of people complain about this, and I mentioned this in all my guide videos, is just simply change your school pip. Not too hard, and if you're struggling on Archmastery, just increase your Archmastery stat. But you will always basically start off with the school pip. So basically just change that to storm and you're good to go. Instead of it consuming 3 pips, essentially power pip and a new pip or 2 new pips, you can just simply use a school pip, and that will just only consume 1 school pip, so which is like 1 power pip. So that is very interesting to remember. Now, if you're not going to be doing storm weaving rank 4, which straight up you should be doing, that is like number 1 priority. The second priority is visiting Old Sage. Old Sage would give you a trap. Now, it's not as important on a life, but it is a secondary option. I think there is really no better option than storm in my opinion for life, just because of those blades. This is only useful if you are hitting, but the thing is, majority of strats nowadays don't really rely on a myth, or a life hitter. So you're only using this for supporting a myth hitter. That's like the only reason you would get the memory trap for rank 2. So if there's any strats that involve a fight where you can't feint, you can't blade, you can only use traps and stuff like that, no like X pip spells like backdraft, this spell is good for that fight. So it's good in a sense if you have a myth hitter, but you aren't using it for the life trap in my opinion. Maybe if there's a solo fight, but even then there's other traps that you can use in my opinion, like life trap and then the item cards that you'll be using in your builds. Same thing with crystal. I don't recommend doing crystal. You're going to get a life and an ice trap, which at that point, if you really want to trap, just do old sage. And then for example, you wouldn't do Charlie. Charlie doesn't give you anything buff related. It's only for the fusion stuff, which is mainly tailored towards advanced combat / PvP in my opinion. There's also Morrison, which gives you a life and death attenuate. There's no reason to do that when you can just get energy attenuate from Surge, which is just better in my opinion. Yes, they're the same percentage, but you know, the storm one's going to be so much more better over time with your supporting capabilities in fights versus the death one. Of course, if, you know, storm is like not the best in that fight and maybe death is, then sure, you can get Morrison done as well. But if we're, you know, not talking about storm rank 4, your second option is myth rank 2, just for the trap, but it's not like a must. And then lastly as well is balance actually. So balance gives you a strength blade. I want to clarify this. This is a balance blade, not a universal blade. So this is strictly a blade for balance. So if you think you're going to get 2 blades out of this, no. So like if someone's already done like, let's just say spirit blade, etc. and you know, you really need that another buff, then sure, you can use this on like a life hitter or something like that, or someone cosplaying. But it's very niche. That's why I'm not really, you know, I wanted to include it in the setup in a sense where like, okay, it's a third option. But realistically, I think the only 2 that you should be getting done is Surge, #1 priority, get yourself rank 4. And then second priority is getting Myth from Old Sage, just rank 2. You don't need to go further on until we see what other spells look like, so you don't waste too much time. And then the rest, I wouldn't do. Harmony is like a slight maybe, but I wouldn't prioritize it. Just finish Surge and finish Old Sage. Those are my recommendations for when it comes to weaving. Now let's head on over to the build section of this video, and we'll start off with the Frilla Source set bonus right here. We'll talk about Frilla Source set bonus, we'll talk about Pierce mount, as well as no mount, and then as well as for life, we're going to be talking about a damage setup. And the reason hence that we're doing this on specifically life wizards, and we'll also be doing this in ice wizards whenever I do the ice video, is that you don't hit the curve that easily. Now, their damage is a little bit low compared to all the other schools. All the other schools relatively hit 237 pretty easily. You will have to basically run all damage at that point to even get close to 237. But in return, your Pierce turns into Shambles. So I will be talking about that towards the end of the video. But let's go over my #1 recommendation right here, which is the Frillasaur set bonus. Of course, that requires the set bonus. If you don't have the pet with the mount, you don't recommend the setup. Just switch to the Pierce mount setup. But we have 208 damage. Resist we don't really care about. Accuracy is 19, which is just enough for life spells, as well as crit block pretty decent, as well as we have 52 pierce on this setup with decent amount of pips, whatever. But when it comes to setup, I am using Avatar Hat. Now you can use Avatar, you can use Reaver. I like using Avatar for the bounce split. Now, when it comes to the pins, you can use whatever sword pins, it doesn't matter, dealer's choice. But for the socket, you have 2 options. You can either use Fire Res, which I do tend to switch to, or if for some reason you like healing in casual PvE, which I'll be honest, you shouldn't need to heal too much, but you can put an outgoing pin. That's completely fine. You get the 29 extra outgoing, sure, why not? But I like to just use the res majority of the time. But it's just, I wanted to include this as an option for you life wizards. The robe, I use Demonic Robe. I've always preferred Demonic, and you can use whatever sockets. If you're wondering why I have an accuracy pin, look at the beginning of this video where I talk about different sockets and such. But use whatever, but Demonic Robe is what you want to be using, which is from the Polaris raid. Now, if you don't want to do the Polaris raid, simple answer is you should go to the Crown Shop and open the Marleybone Mortars Horde Pack. Now, if you go visit here, if we quickly find the robe for life, wherever it may be, because they don't have it organized in here, is right here. Same exact stats, just name is different. And when it comes to the item cards, you do get a rat spin that's, I think, like basically max tier or near max tier. And then on the Demonic Robe, you get Infestation. Now, Infestation is more, I guess, useful for PvP, but I don't know how many life wizards are actually using Demonic Robe. But If you are trying to get like a spell that's like useful between the two, I guess you can just have the rat spin robe, or this rat spin item card from this robe. But realistically, you should just be able to max out this spell over time. So it depends on the player and how valuable you treat them. To me, I don't really care about either or, just because I literally have both of them maxed out, so it doesn't really have an issue with me. Boots, we like to use Reaver because you get the item card Life Trap from the boots. If you don't want to be using the Reaver boots, by all means you can use Avatar boots. Doesn't really matter, they both have the same stats. It's just I prefer Reaver boots for the trap whenever I have to do the solo fights where I can't feint and do niche things. I really like the Reaver boots for that reason. And then the wand, I use Shabalba. I use Shabalba for the hints of the Starblade. Now you can use Shabalba, you can use the rod wands from the new raid. Shabalba is from the Azteca raid, but the thing is, whenever we get 180 upgrades, the rods are going to be more useful, because the fact is these will have upgrades versus the Shabalba ones. So that's why in my videos I always mention that, hey, you should probably get the rod instead, and you can just use that. Don't waste your time farming Shabalba in 2025 unless you're going for badges. But once 180 comes out, don't know how useful Shabalba stuff will be, because, you know, Ghastly Conspiracy raid is just that template, just, you know, upgraded once 180 comes out. So yeah, there's that. But the item cards on, I believe, the wand, or if I can find the rod, so give me 1 second, which is right here. You guys can see it's the same exact stats, it's just the item cards are different. I don't really value these item cards right now. Maybe PvP players will, because I mean, hey, you get a devotion and you also get a spirit shield, but I prefer the Starblade just for supporting capabilities, not even for myself, but it also buffs storms and deaths, so it's very nice to have. But if you don't have the Shabab one, use the rod from the new raid, and then if you don't have either, you can use the Fairy K wand from the pack. If not, just use Reaver Avatar. Nothing bad is going to happen, but I just prefer Shabalba. That's just my personal preference. And then your theme, you actually are using the Dream Reaver a theme. You can use Reaver or you can use Avatar, doesn't matter, just make sure you have these sockets. And then when it comes to your amulet, you see something that's a little bit different. So for my amulet, I am using the Private Eye one, which you get from the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. You can use Reaver, you can use Shabalba, you can use Hun Hao. There's so many different amulets. You can even use the one from the Mushu Gold Key Boss that gives a Hex item card. You have a lot of different options. But I prefer the Private Eye one from the new raid because you do get that Spirit Blade. But we are not using a triangle socket which gives accuracy, because the thing is with the life, you don't need the most insane accuracy. You only need like around 15. I think for like shads, I think it's 15 as well, if we can quickly check. Yeah, like Wings of Fate needs 15, and that's about it really. Like that's like the majority of what you need. 15, 10, and then some spells, if you have path A maxed out, it's 100%. For example, if we go to like Leprechaun at tier 5 is 100%, so you don't even need accuracy. So for that reasoning is we're just putting on an Epic Jewel. There should be some text at the bottom of the screen as always, but watch the YouTube short on how to farm these. Now, if you don't want to put an Epic Jewel, you don't want to go farm it because, you know, it's a life school, and why would I do that? Then by all means, just simply put on accuracy. You can put on accuracy, you can put on other stuff. If you're some type of shad build user, sure, put on shad rating. I don't like using shads. I voiced this a lot. I don't like using shads. If they were consecutive, by all means, sure, but like they're not consecutive at all. You can even put like an item card. There's like the item card dual blades that you can go out and farm. There's so many different options, but I feel like Epic Jewel, maybe accuracy, and then I don't know. It can be anything. It can literally be anything. But you just want to use Private Eye, and it's very straightforward. Ring, we are using Dream Reaver. You can use Dream Reaver Avatar. Just make sure you have the sockets. The pet, this is the pet, which is right here: Life Giver, Pain Giver, Life Bringer, Mighty, and Breaker. And it's going to be on a Frilla sword, and then make sure you have Boon. You can put Boon in the pool, and then you can sock it on Life Giver if you want. So if you have those no shatter Giver jewels, you can put that on. I wouldn't recommend having a Breaker, Mighty, or a Giver socket, just because those, you know, talents are a little bit annoying to get jewel wise, but Bringer, Giver, and Boon are technically pretty easy to get. And if you don't want to use Boon, if for some reason you want to, you can use the Mass Feint jewel that gives like the same damage, but it gives a May cast Mass Feint. It's not a reliable May cast, but if you just want to do it for the flex slot, sure, by all means do that. But make sure it's on a Frilla sword specifically so you can get the set bonus, which you get that 5 extra damage with a Stompy Bronto. So that's like the whole reason why we're using this mount. And then the deck, we are using Private Eye, which gives 9% damage, of course, because that's what we have socketed on. But you can use any deck that gives a circle socket, realistically. You can even use Reaver if you want for the Starblade. But we are just using Private Eye because I prefer the Life Blade, because we get all these different item cards from this whole setup, which is very nice to have, which I just like doing. And then now we can move on to the next setup, which is the Pierce Mount setup. So if you don't have, for example, the Frillasaur set bonus and you just don't like Frillasaurs, this option is going to be leaning towards you, and you can use a Clockwork Courser or you can use a Vulpine Avenger. I don't recommend buying the whole bundle, which is like $30-40 when, you know, just for a per mount. Maybe if you care about the other stuff that's in the bundle, sure, but I don't think anything's useful from there unless you care about cosmetics. But eventually be in the crown shop, so just wait for it to be in the crown shop, and I'll probably make a YouTube short whenever it does get added back into the crown shop. But on a Pierce Mount with this setup. So now if we go look at our stats, you can see that we're still at 208 damage with this setup, which is very nice to see, but the only difference is our Pierce goes down by 2%, which is 50. So that's like the caveat you trade off. You lose 2% Pierce, in return you can, you know, have more of a flexible pet, which you guys will see in a minute. But when it comes to our gear, we're still using Avatar. You can use a Mending Pin or a Fire Res Pin, and the Sword Pins don't really matter, but you can use Avatar or Reaver. I prefer Avatar because the item card. The robe, you're going to be using Daemonic or the Marleybone pack one. It's really just personal preference. They both are exactly the same stats. So either you get the Daemonic robe from the Polaris raid, or you get the one from the pack in the crown shop. And then whatever sockets. And then the sockets I kind of already mentioned at the beginning of the video. Reaver boots, or you can use Avatar, both the same stats, just different item cards. Wand, we are using Shabalba, but I would do Ghastly Conspiracy raid and get the rods instead. That will future proof you for whenever we get 180 upgrades for the raid. So use Shabalba for now if you have it. If you don't have it, get the rods, and then if not, you can use the Fairy K pack wands. If not, use Avatar or Reaver. At the aim, we are using Reaver. You can use Avatar as well, just make sure you have the sockets. Amulet, we're still using Private Eye. You have the option of any amulet realistically, so my recommendation is either Private Eye, you can use Reaver for the blade, or you can even use Shabalba or Hunt Howl if you want to, but I kind of been liking the Private Eye ones way more because the item cards. As well as when it comes to Epic Jewel, just remember, watch the YouTube short that's already on the channel. And then the ring, we are still using Reaver / Avatar, but we do have a damage socket instead of a pierce socket, which we had on the previous build. If you don't want to make another ring, what you could just do simply is just have another amulet and put damage instead of pierce, because, you know, you will have to get another 145 health jewel as well as another square socket, which are easy to get. They're both from the vendors, so that really shouldn't be an issue. But if for some reason you don't want to go far and beyond and do all that stuff, you can just craft another amulet, put a damage jewel on it, and just call it a day. So if that's something you want to do, go for it. And now the pet, you have a lot of different options. You have a lot of different options when it comes to life, but my number one priority is the Eternal Skeletal Warrior. If you don't know how to get this pet, there's already a video on the channel. But these are the stats you want to have on the pet, which is Life Giver, Pain Giver, Life Bringer, as well as Mighty and Breaker, and then a Piercer socket. Ideally, you would want Pierce in the pool, and you would want to socket on a Life Giver or Life Bringer depending on what jewels you have. Of course, some people like to socket on a Pain Giver, Mighty, or Breaker, or Piercer. It just depends on what you have, what jewels you have. But I feel like the easiest one is the Life Giver jewel because there's no shatter variations. And then when it comes to the item cards, this pet does give you a life blade. It does give you thorns, which is 3 life blades that are plus 25%. And of course they don't stack. So like if you're wondering like, oh, if I do one hit, does he use all 3 life blades? No, these are 3 life blades that are all separate. Kind of like how a spirit blade works. And then you also get yourself a sharpened blade. So this is my number one recommendation when it comes to the pet. Just make sure you have those stats as well on the pet. Now, if you don't want to use a Skeletal Warrior, we have some different options you can use, which I will put a graphic on screen. But number one, in my opinion, as I said, was the Eternal Skeletal Warrior, which gives you a blade, the Tri-Blade, as well as the Sharpened Blade. Your next option is getting the Life Hamster. At the time of recording this, there is Life Decathlon. If you're watching in the future, Life Decathlon, it's probably gone, who knows. But you can finish that event and you can get yourself the Hamster, which gives you a Life Blade, as well as a Spirit Shield and a Sharpened Blade. I used to use those, but I saw the Skeletal Warrior give you 3 Life Blades, which is very nice to have in my opinion. So I kind of just stopped using the Hamster in favor of the Skeletal Warrior. And then if you don't want to use either of those 2 pets, you can use the Ghastly Conspiracy Raid pet, and that will give you a Balance Blade as well as a Spirit Blade, and then it will also give you a Life Blade. So it's a very nice pet that gives you 3 really good item cards, but that's like my 3rd recommendation. After that, I do recommend the Lively Possum. The other first 3 that we mentioned are exclusive pets, so if you don't know what that is, definitely just look up that term. But If you don't want to do the whole exclusives and stuff, you can use the Lively Possum. Now, this Lively Possum gives you a blade for your own school. It also gives you a Blade Storm. It does give you a Pierce Blade, but I'm not really going to mention it. But the Blade Storm and the Blade is very nice. So you can have a blade for yourself when you're doing those solo fights, and then when you're in multiple fights with other players, you can just use the Blade Storm from your pet. It's a very good pet just for yourself and supports. The next option is a Leaf Wing, and what this Leaf Wing does is it gives you 2 life blades. It's very niche, but hey, I mean, I wanted to include a pet that gives you 2 life blades. It's just nice to have to a certain extent, so that's why I'm including it. And then my last option for life is using the Courageous Bull, which gives you a blade of your own school, which in this case, it will be a life blade, as well as it gives you smoke and a choke spell. The smoke screen is good for those fights where they're stun immune and you don't want to sit through animation time, so you can use smoke screen if they are stun immune and you have a higher chance for them to fizzle. And you can stack that with regular smoke screen, so you can kind of make them almost fizzle every time. And then the choke is good if, let's say, you pull into a mob fight. If you only pull 3 out of the 4, you're waiting for the other one to come by, and you want to save animation time, you can use choke to stun them and, see less animation time. It's very good for those like strategies where you're just trying to min-max time. So I think Courageous Bull is definitely a way to go, if over the Leaf Wing to a certain extent, just because at least it gives you 2 cards that you can use for the supporting capabilities. But those are my just recommendations for Life School when it comes to pets. At the end of the day, you can use whatever pet. If you want to use a pet that gives you a feint, if you want to give you use a pet that gives you multiple sharpened blades, by all means go for it. But these are just my personal recommendations when it comes to using a pet on Life. Now after the pets, you guys already saw, we are using a Clockwork Courser mount for the Pierce, or it can be a Vulpine Avenger mount. By all means, go for that. And then the deck, we are still using Private Eye with a damage socket. And that's basically the Pierce build. Now we can go over the second to last setup, which is the no mount setup. Now it's literally just the same thing as the previous setup. So we will be at 208 damage with 48 pierce instead of 50 pierce. So you're literally just dropping the mount for 2 pierce and you'll be at 48%, which, I mean, hey, it is what it is. This is what life stats tend to look like. We'll quickly go over the setup. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because you can just literally watch the previous setup and just take off the mount. That's what you do. But it's just Avatar, Reaver, and then Demonic or Mortar's Pack, Boots, Reaver, Avatar, Wand, Shabalba, or the Rod from the Raid, or you can use the Fairy Cape Pack Wand or Avatar, Reaver. A theme, you're using Reaver, Avatar. Amulet, you're using Private Eye or any amulet that has a circle socket and a triangle socket, or even just a circle socket, to be honest. And you can put whatever sockets you want, but I just have Epic Jewel. Ring, you're using Reaver or Avatar. Pet, any combination of pet, just with these stats, which is double pierce, triple damage with Mighty on the pet. And the mount, any mount, and then the deck, Private Eye, it can be any socket. Realistically, that's a square. At the end of the day, you can use any deck that has a circle socket and just put on damage. And that's basically the no mount setup. Very straightforward. And then lastly, this is a specific build that I'm only going to be including in Life and Ice, which is just straight up all damage to basically make you achieve the actual stats. Now, this would be 237, but I'm not going to shatter my my pierce roll for this. Actually, we can just do this and there you go. So you'll be at 237 with this build, and good res, whatever, but you have good damage now, so you literally went up so much percent in damage, but in return your pierce is 30. So if you are doing a fight where you don't have to worry about shields and you don't have to worry about piercing an enemy, by all means go for this. Like, literally use a build where you just go strictly all damage to a certain extent, where you just hit 237, and in return your pierce will be 30, but you'll lose 20% pierce, which is very situational, of course. If it's a fight, like I said, that you don't have to worry about pierce, then sure, this completely works. And when it comes to the build, you are using Avatar or Reaver, Demonic or the Marleybone Pack Robe, Boots, Reaver, Avatar, Shabalba Wand, or Attunement Rod, or Fairy Cape Pack Wand, or Avatar Reaver. And then the theme, we're using Dream Reaver, but with all damage sockets. Amulet, we're using, it could be any amulet. I just have this equipped just to showcase this, but it can be any amulet that has a circle socket and put on damage. You can use literally just a Private Eye one, but I didn't want to make another one with a pierce or another damage jewel, so instead we're just using this. And then the ring, we're using Reaver with all damage as well. The pet, it doesn't have to be on a Frillasaur. I just didn't want to take off my 2% pierce jewel on my Skeletal Warrior, but it can be any pet with these stats, just all damage with a 1 pierce talent. And then the mount would be a pierce mount, and your deck would be any deck with a circle socket for damage. But even if you took off the pierce mount, you'd be down to 28 pierce. I just included the pierce because I wanted to make sure I at least get 30. But you do hit 237 with this build. This build is optional. I did want to include it just to showcase that like literally life can get to 237, but it's just the fact is that if you do something like this, your Pierce is in shambles, and that's a really big downside to a certain extent, because the fact is if they shield or if they have a lot of res for your own school, you're not going to be doing as much damage as you think you will be doing. So just including it as a specific niche build if you ever wanted to do it, but hey, thought I'd just mention it in this video at least. And then the last thing we're going to be covering is how to build a deck setup, which is very easy to do, which is you're going to be using 3 epics. If you have a epic jewel, by all means, this is where you would uncheck this and use this, as well as you would use a Forest Lord and 2 Zan the Bandits. You can use, for example, Rat Spin if you want to, but realistically, if we're going to use Rat Spin, might as well just use Zan the Bandit, which is just better. So your deck can be something like this on the off chance, you know, you don't have the school pip. But with this, for when it comes to life, you just have to remember to change your school pip. So for example, if you for some reason use Zan the Bandit and then you don't kill and you decide to frenzy and then hit the next round, you have to make sure to change your pip to life for Rat Spin. So that's like the only caveat thing with life, is like you're gonna have to switch your pips a lot if you're gonna be using some sort of setup like this. And then you can pack other hits for like the 7 card, like when it comes to like mob fights and stuff. But this is literally all I would pack if you're doing mob fights. Now, of course, if it's a boss fight, just simply uncheck all these blades, because you can just use those for stackability purposes. You can add yourself a spirit blade as well as a feint if you need to, depending on the boss. And then of course, potent trap, which is very straightforward, and a sharpened blade. But you don't need a 20, 50, 100, you know, not really 100, but you get what I mean. You don't need to fill up your entire deck just for one fight. For mob fights, I always say run a 7 card deck. And then when it comes to boss fights, you can just simply use a, you know, add a feint, add some blades. That's something you can do. I know some people, what they like to do is they drop the epic and include a sharpened blade, as well as a blade of your own school, so you get 45% instead of 40. But I prefer frenzy because, you know, at least it's buffed for multiple rounds, while the blade is only for 1 hit. So that's like my only caveat when it comes to that. But if you want to do that, go for it. But this is just what it's always been for me, because you never know if you're fighting that has like steel charm or disarm, enfeeble, or some sort of like thing like an earthquake, etc. So I've always just used this as my setups, unless it's a boss fight. Then I uncheck a majority of these cards, as well as I add like 2 feints and a potent trap, and then a sharpened blade with a blade of my own school. Very straightforward. And then when it comes to sideboard stuff, I do recommend packing empowers. It can be empowers or dark packs. So if you ever get hit with those, you know, E-free weaknesses, because they seems like they've been bringing it back more often, in my opinion. And especially if we're going to Darkmoor, who knows if there's going to be a lot of death mobs with the weaknesses. I can already imagine it. But having a dark pact, having empowers would be good just to get rid of that stuff and then get a buff out of it. Another thing you can pack is a cleanse as well in your sideboard. You can even pack shatters and pierce depending on the fight you're doing, and then you can also pack reshuffles. I do recommend packing a reshuffle inside versus in main, because main deck reshuffle I believe is 4 pips while TC is 3. So that's a very straightforward knowledge that you should always just kind of know about. But beyond that, you can pack other stuff in your side deck, like blades, traps, whatever. But I don't think you need a full sideboard. I think at most you can pack a row, but you don't need to pack like a full sideboard of just support cards and like cleanses and empowers and stuff like that. You don't need to do that. I think a row is fine. Beyond that, you don't need to go further beyond that. And that's basically it. That's the setups that you would run on a life. I think the only downside is with life is that you're not going to hit 237 damage like reasonable compared to all those other schools. Same thing ice. Whenever you guys see the ice video, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's just something that life has, right? They have decent res and health too to like kind of compensate towards that. And of course, there's like other reasonings. You know, if you understand how certain schools work, you'll understand why life is how it is currently. But pick your poison when it comes to builds, and like I said with the Pierce build, it's easier to use in my opinion, because the fact is you can use whatever pet. But if you have the Frilla for set bonus, by all means you can do it, but you just the only thing you get is 2 extra Pierce. That's like the cool thing about it, but you do lose all those item cards from the pet. I guess you can make that argument. As well as when we were mentioning the all damage build, you can do it, but my only thing is when it comes to doing something like that is the fact is if you don't know how much res the enemy has or if they have shields against you. That's like the one thing you have to be wary about in my opinion. Also, I know I don't mention anything Shad related, but I've always said this, I don't really care about Shad. So if you want to pack a Lord of the Jungle in your deck setups, go for it. It's just I don't like relying on Shads, because if you rely on that and you don't get a Shad, let's say turn 2, then the card is useless and you just divert from that to Forest Lord. but then it also takes up a slot in your deck. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, all type of stuff. Appreciate all the support on all the recent videos, and hopefully we'll get all through the guides in the next couple days. I'm just trying my best to when it comes to recording all these videos. But that is it for me, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys.